Welcome everyone. You are attending the routing sheets and DocuSign training. My name is Ingrid Campbell. I'm the contracts analyst with the Internal Business Services Department. Next. Your facilitators for the training today are Jazz Sohal, Purchasing Services Manager, Howard Stiskin, Risk Management Supervisor, Debbie Shao, Senior Executive Assistant, Elizabeth Franco, Senior Grant Writer, Ingrid Campbell, Contracts Analyst. Some virtual training guidelines. This training session is being recorded. Please remain muted to avoid distractions. Enter your questions in the chat. There will be a Q&A at the end of the training as time allows. You will receive a link to a post-training survey. Please take the time to provide feedback and post any questions you might have that was not answered during this training. The training presentation and recording will be posted on the intranet. Next. Training overview. Today we will go over the steps that you need to follow before the routing process starts. What are the documents that you need to put the contract or MOU or agreement package together before you start the routing process? We'll review the routing sheets and then we'll go into more detail into the routing sheet sections. We'll review again who initials the routing sheets, and then we'll go into what information you need when you are creating a requisition, a PO or invoice for a contract, MOU or agreement. And finally, we will go through the DocuSign that is going to be mainly for contracts, what the DocuSign process is. Next. Steps to follow before the routing sheet process starts. We have developed some questions, so some guiding questions to help you with this decision. Jazz will be talking about this.
Thank you, Ingrid. Good morning, everyone. So verifying compliance with AR 3310. For those of you that did not attend the MOU and contract training, AR 3310 is the board policy and administrative regulations for business and non-instructional operational expenditure. So AR 3310, beside providing general information on what the purpose and scope of that regulation is for staff, it has a definition of office purchase system, office standards, SCCOE staff responsibilities, process for selecting vendors and contractors. That's where this next question is, what is the total contract amount? This is actually a bid threshold that is set annually by Department of Education. Threshold for 2022 is at 99,100. So this is annually adjusted for inflation. For example, last year's bid threshold was 96,700. So every January we go back and we, depending on what the CDC says, what the bid threshold based on this annually adjusted inflation, we change our AR 3310. So the way the expenditures are laid out for our purposes, I'm only going to cover buying items and services and leave construction out because that has a whole host of different regulation compliance piece. And so for our purpose here, it's just regular services and buying items. So the way it's laid out is an informal bidding process, procuring items or purchasing items that are between 3,000 and less, items which is informal bidding that are between 3,000 and based on this year's bid threshold 99,099. Yeah. So this is when you need a best source, and I'll go through that. And then you have formal bidding process, which are purchases at or over 99,100. Then you have the RFP process and some exceptions where the sole source comes in and some of the technology items. So that's kind of how our AR 3310 is laid out. So I'll go back to informal bidding process. So these are purchases less than 3,000. You know, you just want to get minimum 3 quotes when possible. Even if you have less, that is okay. Very, very small micro purchases. So for purchases that are between 3,000 and less than 99,100 or 99,099, you are required to provide purchasing a best source justification. Basically, that's a memorandum. We already have a format for it. If you don't have it, I can guide you to it, or just contact me. We'll provide you one. Basically, what that says is, you know, if the program is selecting a vendor which is under the bid threshold amount, you need to provide justification why you are selecting this contract, right? Why does the department consider this a best source? So price is always the biggest, highest weighted. That needs to be bullet that, hey, this particular vendor is price competitive, that you checked with other 2-3 vendors, and then you provide other, you know, unique qualification for this vendor why you selecting them. So purchases, again, 3,000 but below 99,100 requires a best source justification. What we want you to do is, or what I often see now is, we'll get a routing sheet and, you know, there's no best source justification. I look at the contract, or the contract is actually over 90, you know, over 99,100. That should be actually a request for proposal or formally bid it out. And that sets you back as a program, because now you're under a time constraint because purchasing had kicked this back to you because we're not in compliance, and it just doesn't help anybody. We're here to help. So my request here for everyone listening is that when you see these amounts, please go look at AR 3310, and when you're over these bid thresholds, or you're, you know, over 3,000, approach us first. I will help you write the best source justification. I can walk you through it. I really want to encourage you guys to contact us beforehand, not at the tail end where we have to kick the routing sheet back. As part of the reason why purchasing is at the top, right? We want you to do that work beforehand and not be an afterthought. So what is a formal bidding process? So any amount for our purposes that is, you know, purchase of equipment, materials, supplies, it needs to go through a competitive bid process, right? Meaning we do an RFP. You know, it's a process where we actually need to advertise in a newspaper, contact as many vendors we can. So it's not only competitive, but it's fair and equitable to all vendors, and they all have a chance, you know, to provide proposal for us. And we go through a selection, depending if it's a service, we'll have a selection criteria that we go through to select a vendor. And again, I help you with that. I again encourage you that you approach us first so we can lay all that process out, because it does take 3 to 4 weeks for competitive bidding to take place, right? Because you have to advertise for bid, and there's this whole list of process which I don't want to go through right now. But even if you have a professional service that doesn't exceed 99,100, you can still do an RFP, right? Because sometimes that's in our best interest. We just don't want to contact a couple people. Maybe there are 10 vendors out there. We want to contact all of them and see what they can do for us. Best pricing, best service. So that's where that criteria comes in. Other than that, what we have listed on this slide is sole source. So that comes under an exception. This is should not be a regular purchasing. A lot of time, I will ask the program, did you contact any other vendors? No, this is what we used last year. But that kind of doesn't fly, especially if you're over the bid threshold. There are some legal exceptions for technology because technology changes or is very unique, where you can sole source. For example, most of us have Dell monitors, right? Because the entire organization has Dell monitors and our technology is familiar with how to service them or computers, we can justify them being a sole source. So you still provide this memo why we are going to sole source, but that comes under exception. There's some legal services and some services that are very unique in nature, like architects and those type of things, even some auditors. So please know that single source, a sole source is an exception to the competitive bidding process, and you have to justify why the vendor you're selecting, why they're the only one capable of supplying the required goods or services. Let's see. Other than that, I just want to clarify some of it. If you have questions, please post them. I would love to answer those. But the main thing I want to take away is that please contact purchasing first before you even maybe contact the vendor, say, hey, this is our need, this is what we're trying to do, and we can help you look for vendors. We will help you, kind of guide you where you need to do a best source justification or sole source or RFP. So that's my piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. And I also wanted to add, you can find the best source and the sole source template in the intranet. We also have a couple of examples there, but like Jess says, if you have any issue, you're having a problem, just contact him. It will save you time, the contractor time, and it just runs quickly and smoothly.
Correct. Now, what I can do for you and actually provide you samples that are already written up rather than a blank form, that may just help you. Oh, okay, I see there's a similar service that another program's done and how they're written out their, best source justification. So my piece here was that, I encourage you to go to our, board policies, administrative regulation, 3310 in particular, because it talks about expenditures, talks about what our standards are for SCCOE. And the information I was citing is all laid out there, right? When do you do that? I'm not even covering, 20% of this because there's a lot on the construction side as well. So please contact me. I would love to help you at the front end.
Thank you, Jazz. Next. Under the steps to follow before you start routing contract, you need to request a copy of the W-9. And this is extremely important because this is going to determine whether you can use a PSA or not. When you're writing the PSA, you need to write it using the name as shown on the W-9. So many times we have a contract where the vendor name shows something and the W-9 shows something similar, but not quite the same. We need those two names to match. You need to check that all the W-9 sections are filled out. And then if the vendor provides a W-9 with a social security number, remember, we need to follow the process for independent contractor determination. This is actually an IRS requirement. We cannot skip it. We have to do this. This was covered in the previous training. If you have any questions, please contact me. You can also find the independent contractor determination form in the intranet. And lastly, check that the W-9 is signed and dated. On this, we also wanted to note that per IRS, the W-9 does not expire. However, it is the SCCOE best practice to request the W-9 that has been signed within a year of the contract start date. And the reason for this is a lot of time vendors change names or business classification, or they change their address, or they merge with another company, and they forget to inform us. Then at the end of the year, when purchasing is doing the 1099s, guess what? A lot of them gets returned back from the post office because the vendor moved, or purchasing receives some kind of notification from the IRS that it's not done correctly. Next. We have a couple of W-9 examples here, and I highlighted some of the things that you need to look for. If you receive a W-9 like this one, where you have a name on line 1 and a name on line 2, or you might only have a name on line 1, and they have marked either a corporation, a C corporation, or an S corporation, or a liability, limited liability company, and then they provide an employer identification number. This W-9 is clear to write a PSA. Next. If you receive a W-9 that looks like this one, where there is a person's name in the first line, sometimes they might even have a DBA on the second line. They mark individual, also proprietor, and then they have a social security number. This will trigger the independent contractor determination, and we need to follow that process before you can write the PSA. You'll need to get clearance from the contracts office. Next. Once you have these documents, you can start completing the sections of your PSA. There is another document that you will need, and another piece of the contract that is very important, and that a lot of times presents some problems, and that is the certificate of insurance and endorsement, and Howard will talk to us about it.
Thank you, Ingrid. Hello, I'm Howard Stiskin in the Risk Management Department. The Risk Management Department reviews and approves the insurance portion of each contract. As an overview, we require specific insurance from our contractors to protect COE in case there is a claim for bodily injury or property damage. With that in mind, a certificate of liability insurance is required for all contracts to include an insurance endorsement adding COE as an additional insured. An additional insured means that the contractor's insurance actually covers us, which is one of the most important components. For contracts with no student contact, sections 5 and 6 of the contract outlines the required insurance. For contracts with student contact, sections 7 and 8 of the contract outlines the required insurance. So as a practice pointer, please note that delays in the approval process generally occur when insurance information is missing. I suggest that at the beginning of the contracting process, you point out the insurance sections to your contractor and recommend that they provide this to their insurance broker. If they have the insurance, their insurance broker should be able to complete the certificate of insurance correctly. If they do not have the actual required insurance, we can then have that conversation at the beginning of the process and hopefully resolve everything without delay. Next slide. So this slide shows what a proper certificate of liability insurance looks like. Next slide. So the top red circle, that is the insured, which is the contractor. Next slide. The middle circle is where we needed to state that COE is an additional insured, which, as said earlier, is one of the most important components. And finally, at the bottom is the certificate holder, which is the COE. Next slide. Now this slide shows what endorsements adding COE as an additional insured look like. As stated previously, the endorsement confirms that COE is covered by the insurance. Without this, COE may not be covered. Primary language that you may see in these documents include the words endorsement or additional insured. And of course, the risk management department will be reviewing these documents because sometimes they're convoluted and will of course provide any feedback. So that basically covers the insurance section and how to avoid the most common delays in the approval process. Of course, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me at your convenience. Thank you.
As a reminder, if you have any questions while we're going through this presentation, please add them to the chat and we will review them at the end as time allows. If we don't have extra time for questions and answer, we will make sure we'll answer your questions and we'll send you an email with the answer. I also wanted to add on the endorsement, we added 3 samples there, but every policy has a different format. These are the most frequent ones, but we've seen so many other formats. So just talk to us, talk to Howard, we'll help you figure it out. Next. Other steps you will need to complete before the routing process starts is some pre-approvals. One of the examples I can name is when the other agency or the vendor is requesting for them to use our logo or for us to use their logo. This will require an approval from media and communication. It will save you time if you get those approval ahead of time. Another example is if the contract requires data governance review. In some cases, they will need to have you fill out some other or additional agreements that the vendor will need to review and sign. So it is better, as soon as you know that your contract includes student data, you need to contact the data governance. It's just easier. It will make your job faster. It will go faster instead of waiting for the contract to go to data governance and then data governance comes back to you when the contract is already routing and will need to add other agreements. Next. Now that you have completed your steps, you got ready to put your packet together. So what should be in the contract packet? You should have a copy of the document that verifies compliance with AR 3310. This is what Jazz was talking about. Do I need a sole source, a best source? Or for RFP or bid, if you already went through the process, purchasing will assign a number. You need to put this number in your routing sheet. You will need a PSA with all the sections filled out. You'll need the certificate of insurance, the insurance endorsement document, and the W-9, additional data sharing forms, if applicable, and any necessary pre-approvals like the one we just mentioned from media and communication. When you are processing an amendment, please make sure you include a copy of the document that verifies compliance with AR 3310, a copy of the certificate of insurance, a copy of the insurance endorsement, and a copy of the W-9. The reason we request that you include this with amendments is to facilitate the review process. If you don't include these documents, what's going to happen is when it comes to us, we're going to go to the original document. Especially in the case of certificate of insurance, we need to make sure that the certificate of insurance is still current. Is still, the date is, if it had expired, then we're going to have to request a new certificate of insurance. That's why we need all these documents when you are processing an amendment. Please do not include with the routing package any vendors, quotes, or agreements or scope of work. Don't include requisitions of POs, and do not include email communication. And this is a big one. Please don't include email communications. You can include pre-approvals. I would rather you not to include them. You can send them to me, and then I'll make sure I'll attach that when we have the final copy, but don't include emails when you are routing your package. The reason for this is, especially with DocuSign. DocuSign is wonderful. It has saved us a lot of time, but one of the challenges we have with DocuSign is that once the process is done, is completed, everybody who was tagged in your DocuSign is going to get a final copy of this document. So if you have emails that are considered to be internal emails, the vendor is going to receive a copy. So we don't want that. Sometimes, most of the time, we don't approve vendors' agreements to be included or to be attached to our PSA. But if you include a copy of the vendor agreement in your DocuSign envelope, then in a way that is becoming part of the document. We don't want that. If you need to send me a copy of the quote or a copy of the agreement, do that in a separate email, but don't include it with the DocuSign envelope. Next. We're now going to do a quick overview of the routing sheets before we go into details. Next. As we show you in the previous training, the routing sheets went through a complete makeover. We changed the routing sheet based on feedback we received from admins who tried it out and from experience. Next, the main changes are we expanded the SCCOE staff contact section. One of the areas we added here was the division and department. We've been receiving a lot of requests from public records lately, and one of the information we have to provide to them is which division, which department are processing these documents. So that's why now we are requesting this information. It is very important that we are able to file these contracts under the right division and department. Next. We move the contract agreements and information and the compensation terms to the top. The reason for this is because a lot of cases, whatever you choose or whatever you select here, or the information you input here is going to determine who is going to be reviewing the contract. Next. We added a revenue checkbox. Next. We moved the contract packet section to step 2. It just makes sense, right? Just you have to, once you are clear with your purchasing, then you start putting your packet together. Next. We added a risk management insurance review step, and we want to do this early in the process. As Howard mentioned earlier, this is one of the biggest challenges we have with contracts, is insurance. So we want to get this clear early. If you have any questions regarding your insurance, or even if you want Howard to preview your insurance before you start the process, please feel free to do so. Send him a copy. He'll be happy to review it for you before it gets into DocuSign, and that way the DocuSign process will go faster. Next. We added the data governance initials for contracts that are involving data sharing, student data sharing. Next. And we added the SCCOE signs first. This is only applicable when we are the vendor for some revenue agreements and for some MOUs with the school districts. The reason for this is some school districts require their board approval, and for that we'll need to sign first. Next. The student contact routing sheet pretty much had the same changes as the non-student contact. The changes specific to this routing sheet are: step number 6, the responsible administrator acknowledges that the contractor will not begin services until the contract is finalized and the hiring authorization form is approved by HR. The main reason for this is we found there was a disconnect sometimes between the admin who is helping the responsible administrator process the contract and the responsible administrator. At times, the responsible administrator saw, well, the vendor signed, we're ready to go. In a lot of cases, that's not what's happening. We need to make sure that the contracts are clear by HR. By having the responsible administrator initial here, we are asking him, please acknowledge that you cannot bring the contractor to the classroom until we receive clearance from HR. We need to protect our agency, but mainly we need to protect our students. It is our best interest that our students are protected and that we are guaranteeing that the people who are going into the classrooms have already been cleared by HR. Next. In this step, the contract originator, most of the time will be the admin, to collaborate with human resources, gather required components, and submit completed contractor packet. I wanted to make a note on this. This is the way that most departments follow this process. But if your department has a different process on how the contractor, how the vendor is put into contact with human resources, please follow your internal department processes. Next. Once all this is completed, the vendor has gone through all the process, background check, fingerprinted, then human resources certificated personnel director will review the contract for completion of required HR components, and they will clear the contract to move forward. Next. For legal contracts are actually managed by the Office of the Superintendent. If your department determines that you need a legal contract, please contact the Office of the Superintendent. For new contracts, contact Ruby Parra. For legal contracts amendments, you can contact Jamie Whitford. Next. We're now going to go into the routing sheet sections into a little more detail. As I mentioned before, we added the division and department sections. You can either spell out your division or department name, or you can use acronyms. You need to provide the admin and the responsible administrator contact information. What will happen is if any of us have a question, we will contact the admin, but sometimes, as you know, admins move around. We need to know who was the responsible administrator for the contract in case we have any questions to follow up. Next. The contract agreement information and compensation terms. For the original contract, you'll need to, and we're going to use the student contact routing sheet just because it covers all the sections that are included in the non-student contact. In this case, it's Row Health. You'll need to select professional services agreement. You need to give us a brief description of what it is. In this case, nursing services support for the COVID prevention team, the anticipated start date, the end date, and the original contract amount, $500,000. In this case, I actually used this example on purpose. Row Health, like Jazz mentioned, some services will fall into the sole source exceptions. In this case, because of the shortage in nursing and health services, some of these companies will fall into that exception. But like Jazz mentioned, please contact him ahead of time. And even if they fall into a sole source exceptions, we still need to write the sole source memo. If you are processing an amendment, then you will check the amendment to RM number, and please include the RM number. The reason for this is, like with Row Health, we have 4 different contracts with them. So we need to make sure we are amending the right original contract. Next. Once you have all those sections completed, we're going to start our internal writing. In this case, we're going to select the sole source. You'll need to include the sole source memo, and you'll need to tag Jazz or purchasing to initial. Then you're going to select all that applies under the contractor, under the contracts packet, and you need to tag Howard in step number 3 for the risk management review. Next. Some notes to keep in mind for contracts. Next. All contracts will require the purchasing verification form. If the contract is under 3,000, you can mark NA, but only for contracts that are 2,999 and below. Next. The COE is required for all contracts, no exceptions. Next. WB form is required for all contracts over $1. Next. Risk management insurance review is required for all contracts. Next. If you are processing an MOU, step 1 is not required for MOUs. You can select NA. COE is not required for SCCOE MOUs. Next. COE will be required for some approved non-SCCOE MOUs. Next. W9 is not required for most MOUs. It might be required for some exceptions, but for most MOUs, W9 is not required. Next. Risk management insurance review is now required for all MOUs. And the reason for this is we want to make sure that MOUs are being drafted between SCCOE and the agencies that are approved under Superintendent Policy 3294. If you need to take a look at the policy, you can find a copy in the internet. It delineates which agencies are approved to write, or which agencies are approved to enter into an MOU with the SCCOE. Another case where risk management might need to do further investigation on an MOU is if we approve an MOU, let's say from Alum Rock School District, we approve to use their MOU. Sometimes these school districts, they require for us to submit or to provide a COE. And the MOU, in some cases, they will also require for them to provide us with a COE. In those cases, risk management will need to provide you with a copy of the COE, or will need to obtain a copy from them of their COE. So that's why now it's required for risk management to review all MOUs. Next. Section 4 is where you're going to start gathering all your initials for construction, design, and leases. You will route it through the General Services Director, and we'll go through those names later on in the presentation. Next. For software and technology infrastructure and supporting services needs to review the contract MOU and initial this step. Next. For contracts agreement involving student data sharing, data governance reviews the contract MOU and initials this step. The SCCOE signed first. This is a new field, and it's only when the SCCOE applies, when the SCCOE is the vendor, or for some approved contracts MOUs. For this, you need, please talk to me first. Explain to me why the SCCOE needs to sign first, and we'll go from there. We'll make a decision. Next. Remember, we are reviewing the student contact routing sheet. The non-student contact routing sheet won't have steps 6, 7, and 8. Once again, step 6 is for the responsible administrator to say, yes, I know I will not bring the contractor into the classroom until HR has provided clearance. Step 7 is for the admin to work with HR, gathering all the forms. Once again, if your department has a different process to complete this step, please follow your department's process. Step 8, HR initials, when the HR process is completed. And then step 9 is when it comes to me for initial review to the contracts office. Once we complete the initial review by the contracts office is cleared to go for signature on step 10, and then it comes back to IBS contract analyst for the RM number. A note that I wanted to add here, IBS, the contract analyst, should be the last tag in DocuSign to sign. We cannot assign an RM number if there is another tag for signature after the last step. The reason for this is we want to make sure that there are not changes to the contract after the RM number has been assigned. Next. For grants, we decided to have a separate section for grants, for routing grants, because this is a new process. It was put in practice last year in 2021. So we wanted to go over this one more time so you guys have a better understanding on how to route a grant. There are 3 routings that you need to follow. The first one will be follow the grant approval and submit a routing sheet form as outlined by the Grants and Partnerships Office. You need to send them a copy of the executed agreement per AR 3292. And the Grants Office has a brand new tab in the intranet. Please, I highly recommend you go to that tab. If you are processing grants, go to the intranet, review the tab. They have a whole new set of forms and resources. And as always, feel free to contact them directly. Then you're going to use a no student contact routing sheet to route the fully signed grant agreement or notification letter to the internal business services contracts risk management process to receive an RM number. This step is only done for record keeping. We do not review the grant application. And your third routing that you need to do is you'll need to complete the approved grant information form for accounting, and you need to send that to your accountant. Next. How you'll need to complete the routing sheet for grants. First, you need to fill out the staff contact section. You need to select other in the contract agreement information section, and you need to type grant. Fill out the contract agreement information and compensation and terms sections. Select revenue. For step 1, select not applicable. Step 2, you can leave blank. Step 3, which is risk management, they don't need to review it. You can either leave it blank or you can write an A using a text box in DocuSign. Gather all applicable initials and acknowledgement that the grant has been awarded. I strongly recommend you do this just because a lot of times these grants are signed by Dr. Duan, and your manager or director or responsible administrator of the grant might not be aware that, hey, it was done, I completed all the processes. This is a way for you to let them know the grant has been fully approved. We are completing all the processes. Next. You can skip step 6 since we don't review the grant. Next. You can skip step 7 also if the grant has been fully executed. And then it comes to me, to IBS contract analyst, to initial and add the tags for RM number, signature, and date. Next. Now you have your package complete. You have a fully approved document. The last step is for you to create a requisition or PO or an invoice for contracts, MOUs, or agreements. Next. So now this is an approved document. We will file a copy in the SCCOE contract repository. For accounts receivables, this is when the SCCOE is the vendor. We are receiving a revenue. You'll need to create an invoice following the contract MOU invoicing terms. Next. For accounts payables, this is when we are paying the vendor. You will need to create a requisition for the contract amount. You need to attach a copy of the fully executed document to the requisition or PO. This is for the accountants to use as a reference. What kind of information you need to include in your requisition? You need to indicate the RM number. You need to indicate the payment terms, the vendor's contact information in case purchasing has any questions, and you also need to include the contract period. Next. When you have an amendment that changes the contract amount or the account structure, you'll need to create a POCO. Next. Who initials the routing sheet? So when you are going over your DocuSign tagging, please use this list as a reference on who you need to initial. For purchasing, you will need to initial Jazz Sohal, and we also listed their assistants here just in case you're having a hard time connecting or contacting them. For section 3, you need to tag risk management. That will be Howard Stinskin. For construction design and leases, you need to tag the general services director. That will be Craig. For software technology purchases, you need to contact Lee Anderson. Next. For contracts agreement involving student data sharing, you will need to contact their governance and strategy manager, that is Irina Schachter. For student contact contracts, section C of the HR components, certificated personnel director will be Marcela Miranda. And I wanted to mention here that HR is going through a transition right now. They're probably going to be done already by the end of April. So if you attended any of the contract trainings, when this transition is done, you will receive an email from us letting you know who the new person in HR will be for tagging the HR sections. For student contact contract section 7, once again, the responsible administrator needs to initial, and all sections requiring internal business services initials, that will be the contract analyst office, that will be me. Please use the icampbell@isccoe.org when tagging IBS sections. Don't use the contracts at SCCOE email because that won't go to my queue. And I wanted to add a reminder here again that internal business services should be the last tag in DocuSign. We will not be able to assign an RM number to the DocuSign envelope. Shows that it is a staff or vendor tag for signature or initials after step 8 of the no student contact or step 11 of the student contact. You can add many other staff or other vendors. Let's say you have the vendor who signs, right? A lot of times the person who signs might not be your contact, and you need to add your contact at the end just to receive a copy. That's okay. That is acceptable. You can add other people after you tag me on step 8 or step 11. You can add other people to receive copies. Next. We are now going to go through DocuSign. DocuSign, this is mainly for contracts. You might be using DocuSign for other processes. The most important or the main request I have on DocuSign is please use one DocuSign envelope per contract agreement or MOU. Please don't attach different MOUs in one DocuSign envelope. The reason for this is once the DocuSign envelope is completed, we get a copy, we file a copy based on the RM number. So if you attach, let's say 3 MOUs in one DocuSign, what's going to happen is I'm going to have to break them down into 3 different contracts or 3 different files. The other problem you have with this is if you are processing different MOUs and you are tagging different vendors in the same envelope or different agencies in the same envelope, what's going to happen is at the end of the process, these agencies are going to receive copies of the MOUs or agreements that are meant for other vendors. So we don't want that to happen. Please use one DocuSign envelope per contract agreement or MOU. So how you start, this is how, for those of you who have DocuSign, this is how your main window looks like. You can either drop the document or you can click what it says start, and that will take you to the windows where you can search for your file. Next. Next. The first step is going to be to set up the signing order. Next. Enter the names using the proper formatting. Please use a capital letter at the beginning of the first and last name. The way you type the name, that's the way it's going to show when they initial or sign. Next, use the current email format. This is very important too. Please use the new format that we're using. Remember, the old one was jazz_soha. Don't use that format anymore. We will have problems. It will not go to the right person. Next. To facilitate the review process, you can also add a private message for the reviewer if needed. Next, how you do that is you click, let's say you need to send a private message to me. You click what it says customize, then that little window will open up. You can click add a private message and another window will open. And here you can add a private message that will only be seen by me. And the reason that I recommend doing this is there are times when I receive 12, 15 contracts or documents in one day. So by you adding this little message here, in this case, this contract was reviewed by legal and it is reflecting the approved changes. You kind of remind me, hey, we already reviewed this. Otherwise, I'm like, I have to go check for my emails to see if we already approved the changes, or I'm going to come back to you. What happened with these changes? Who approved them? Next. There are also some advanced options that I find very useful. When you click an advanced options, a new window will open. Next. Allow recipients to change signing responsibilities. This is useful when, in the past, when risk management will received or was tagged for reviewing a contract and it was determined that it wasn't risk management, it was supposed to be me, the one who needed to review, then risk management was able to change the responsibility to me. This could also be maybe your manager wants the chief to review it before they do. So this allows some flexibility in some change of responsibilities. Now, if you will receive a notification if somebody changes their responsibility to somebody else to sign or to initial, you will receive a notification. Please go back to your document and make sure that it's just an initial, because if it is a signature, then you will need to make sure that the signature name that you typed in is matching the actual signature. Next, reminders. I also find this feature extremely helpful. Most of the people who are reviewing your contract don't have a full DocuSign account. What that means is that they're going to rely on DocuSign reminders to remind them which documents are still waiting for their signature. So I believe the default on this is like 2 and 3 days. When I'm routing a contract for my department, I change this to 1 and 1. What it does is it sends a reminder to the people who are signing, hey, you have this contract in your queue, is waiting for your review and signature. Otherwise, they won't get the reminder until 2 or 3 days. Next, mobile-friendly viewing with responsive signing. This is also, please make sure this is selected. A lot of the assistant superintendents and even the superintendent, a lot of times they use their mobile devices to sign an initial. Next. So here's what it looks like once you have all your tags ready. And as this example, I have, all the tags that needs to be initial, Jazz, then Howard, then Pam, Stephanie. So we have all the initials here. And at the end, we have Debbie Shao. She is Stephanie's executive assistant. I need for Debbie to receive a copy after I assign the RM number, so we can have Debbie as receiving a copy. Next. When you are tagging, make sure you select the correct recipient. Next. Select the correct tag. Do you need a signature? Do you need an initial? And for signature, always add a date sign tag. Next. Use a text box for the RM number. You also can use the text box to correct errors in the routing sheet. If you're using a text box to add information or to add a term to the PSA, you will need to also obtain the vendor's initial if the vendor has already signed. When you select the text box, you're going to open up the new window that is showing on your right. This offers you a whole bunch of different options. You can change the formatting, you can change the font size. When tagging for the RM number, make sure you select the required field. Otherwise, if I click finish too soon and it's not a required field, it will close the envelope without me adding the RM number. Next. These are other uses for the text box. Let's say you have an amendment and after it got to the vendor, you know what, this is completely wrong, we need to change it. Sometimes it happens, the vendor on the front end, they agree to it, but then somebody else reviewed it and say, no, we can't do this. So you can add a big text box in the middle of the form to write disregard or to write void, and then you can add the new one, the new document to your envelope. Another use for the text box is, let's say you wrote on your routing sheet that the contract was for $5,000, but when I start reviewing, I say, hey, I think we have a mistake here. The contract amount is actually $1,000. Can you fix it? You can use a text box to kind of cross out the wrong number and add the new or the correct amount. Next. Forms locations. We created a brand new contracts MOU tab. We updated all the forms, including the contract, the PSA, the routing sheets. All the forms are updated. So please make sure you go to the intranet and download the most recent versions of the forms. In the last training, somebody requested if we could format or change the format for the PSA to where it won't allow you to scroll down and type text that won't show up. The Office of the Superintendent is already working on that. As soon as they finish with the changes, we will post those new versions to the intranet. So please keep checking the intranet. And as I mentioned, make sure to download the latest versions to your desktop. If you already have contracts or MOUs routing, don't worry about it. We are trying to get this in place, full in place by April 1st. So please start using these new forms and contact me if you have any questions. Next. If you have questions regarding the specific sections of the routing sheet, this is the people you need to contact. For the general contract process, contact Ingrid Campbell. For proof of insurance, contact Howard Stinskin. For purchasing guidelines, contact Jazz Ohal. For contract and staff screening and clearance, contact Marcela Miranda. And we will change this once HR finishes with their transition. For data sharing and privacy agreements, contact Irina Schechter. And Debbie, we can stop the